Thank you so much for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar to provide an overview of the draft guidance entitled Formal Meetings Between FDA and Sponsors or Requesters of Over-the-Counter Monograph Drugs. My name is Commander Trang Tran. I am the Senior Regulatory Health Project Manager in the Division of Non-Prescription Drugs 1. Joining me for today's presentation, we also have Commander Elizabeth Thompson, who is the Chief of the Project Management Staff in the Division of Non-Prescription Drugs 2. During today's webinar, we will provide an overview of the draft guidance, formal meetings between FDA and sponsors or requesters of over-the-counter monograph drugs, which was published on February 1st, 2022, and explain the over-the-counter monograph drug user fee program, or OMUFA, timelines for meetings. Before we begin speaking about the guidance, I would like to provide a quick overview of the OTC Monograph reform. On March 27, 2020, the President signed into law the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act. The CARES Act includes an important legislative initiative that reforms and modernizes the way over-the-counter monograph drugs are regulated in the United States by replacing the old rulemaking process with a less time-consuming, less burdensome administrative order process for establishing, revising, and amending over-the-counter monographs. In addition, the CARES Act amends the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and grants the agency the authority to access and collect fees from regulated industry for over-the-counter monograph drug activities from October 2020 through September 2025. These fees provide additional resources which will support over-the-counter monograph drug activities, ultimately providing the public with access to innovative over-the-counter monograph drugs. For simplicity, we will refer to the regulatory framework under the CARES Act as OTC Monograph Reform. For more information about the new administrative order process to establish, revise, or amend OTC monographs, please review the webinar, Monograph Reform is Here. Learn what to expect and how to prepare, from May 29, 2020. Now I would like to provide an overview of the draft guidance. FDA is required to issue this guidance that specifies procedures and principles for formal meetings with FDA and sponsors or requesters of over-the-counter monograph drugs, collectively referred to as meeting requesters with an ER. The guidance describes procedures under which meeting requesters can meet with appropriate FDA officials to obtain advice on studies or other information necessary to support a submission under Section 505G of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Matters relevant to the regulation of over-the-counter monograph drugs and development of new over-the-counter monograph drugs. This guidance also specifies procedures to facilitate efficient participation by multiple sponsors or requesters and/or organizations nominated by them to represent their interests. In support of the CARES Act and the specific OTC monograph provisions, FDA and industry mutually agreed to specific performance goals and procedures described in the document Over-the-Counter Monograph User Fee Program Performance Goals and Procedures, commonly referred to as the OMUFA Commitment Letter. The OMUFA Commitment Letter includes meeting management goals for formal meetings that occur between FDA and meeting requesters. In the OMUFA Commitment Letter, FDA also committed to issuing this draft guidance under specific timelines. Under the Act and Goals document, these formal meetings are only between FDA and sponsors or requesters of over-the-counter monograph drugs. Who exactly are these sponsors and requesters? Well, sponsor is defined in Section 505GQ2 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act as any person marketing, manufacturing, or processing a drug that is listed pursuant to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act 510J, and is or will be subject to an administrative order under Section 505G of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Requester is defined in Section 505G(Q)(3) of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act as any person or group of persons marketing, manufacturing, processing, or developing a drug. We refer to sponsors and requesters collectively as meeting requesters with an ER. There are three types of formal meetings that occur between meeting requesters and FDA staff: Type X, Y, and Z. These meetings may be used to obtain advice on the studies and other information necessary to support over-the-counter monograph order submissions, obtain advice on other matters relevant to the over-the-counter monograph drug regulation, or obtain advice on over-the-counter monograph order development program. More detailed information about each meeting type will be provided in the next few slides. A Type X meeting is a meeting that is necessary for an otherwise stalled over-the-counter monograph order development program to proceed. For example, this could be a meeting that is requested by a meeting requester within 3 months of FDA issuing a refuse to file letter for an over-the-counter monograph order request, also known as OMOR, submitted by that meeting requester. A Type X meeting is also a meeting that is necessary to address an important safety issue that needs immediate action when the meeting requester learns about the safety issue related to an over-the-counter monograph drug that is marketed or being developed. A Type Y meeting is a meeting intended for milestone discussions during the course of meeting requesters over-the-counter monograph order development program. A meeting requester may request a meeting to discuss the overall data recommended to support the following: a positive general recognition of safety and effectiveness, or GRAC, determination for an over-the-counter monograph drug containing a particular active ingredient or subject to some other condition of use, after FDA has stated its intent to make that final GRAC determination. An OMOR submission when a meeting requester has an interest in initiating an OMOR, that is, meeting requester has not yet begun an over-the-counter monograph order development program. When nearing completion of its development program for an OMOR, a meeting requester should request a pre-OMOR submission meeting to present a summary of the data supporting the OMOR and take the following steps: discuss the proposed format of the OMOR, obtain FDA feedback on the adequacy of the proposal for the OMOR submission, such as the format and content of the anticipated OMOR, including presentation of data, structure of data set, acceptability of data for submission, as well as the projected submission date for the OMOR. Discuss the appropriate categorization of the OMOR, such as Tier 1 or Tier 2. The meeting should be held sufficiently in advance of the planned submission of the OMOR to allow for meaningful response to FDA feedback, and should generally occur not less than 3 months before the planned submission of the OMOR. Type Z meeting is any meeting that is not a Type X or Type Y meeting. There are 3 meeting formats: face-to-face, teleconference or video conference, and written response only, also known as WRO. Requesters must submit a written meeting request to FDA electronically. FDA will be issuing a guidance on how to submit OTC monograph submissions electronically, including formal meeting requests. Prior to publication of that guidance, meeting requesters should email meeting requests to monograph-meeting-requests@fda.hhs.gov. With regards to the meeting request content, a meeting request should include adequate information for FDA to assess the potential utility of the meeting and to identify FDA staff necessary to discuss proposed agenda items. A well-written meeting request that includes the components specified in the guidance can help FDA understand and access the utility and timing of the meeting. The draft guidance lists specific information that should be included in the request. It also lists information that must be included in the request in order to qualify for OMUFA performance goals, which I will go over in the next slide. The meeting request must include the following information to qualify for OMUFA performance goals. Brief statement of the purpose of the meeting. Proposed format of the meeting. List of specific objectives or outcomes. Proposed agenda, including estimated time needed for a discussion of each agenda item. Statement of whether the meeting requester intends to discuss information exempt from disclosure under Section 505(g)(d) of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act or other laws at the meeting. List of meeting requesters' planned attendees, including their names and titles. List of requested CDER attendees and/or disciplines, including an explanation for the request as appropriate. And finally, date that the meeting package will be sent to FDA. FDA will assess each meeting request and determine whether the request should be granted and the appropriate meeting type and format. FDA will provide written notification when a meeting is granted. For face-to-face or teleconference meetings, FDA will include in written notification of the date and time of the meeting, conference arrangements or location, and expected FDA participants. FDA will advise the meeting requester if they plan to provide a written response in lieu of a meeting, and the date that they intend to send the written response. FDA has agreed to specific goals for responding to meeting requests, as listed in this slide. However, these response time goals are not effective until October 1st, 2022, and FDA only needs to meet 50% of the total of meeting management goal dates for that fiscal year, which include meeting response, scheduling, preliminary responses, and meeting minutes. After that, the goals for these meetings will increase over time to allow FDA adequate time to ramp up the program. For face-to-face and teleconference or video conference meetings, FDA will schedule the meeting on the next available date at which all expected FDA staff are available to attend. However, the meeting should be scheduled consistent with the FDA meeting scheduling timeframes listed in this table. If the requested date for any meeting type is later than the specified FDA meeting schedule timeframe, the meeting date should be within 14 calendar days of the requested date. Again, these goal dates are not effective until October 2022. If a meeting request is denied, FDA will issue written notification with explanation for the denial. FDA will issue this notification consistent with the timelines that I discussed earlier. Denials will be based on a substantive reason. For example, a meeting request may be denied because it is clearly unnecessary, or the meeting package does not provide adequate basis for the meeting discussion. FDA may also deny requests for meetings that do not have the substantive information as I discussed on the meeting content slide. FDA will also deny a meeting request for an over-the-counter monograph drug meeting as defined in Section 744L11 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act from a person subject to fees until all such fees owed by the person have been paid. A subsequent request to schedule the meeting will be considered a new request. Now I'd like to turn it over to Commander Thompson for the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you, Commander Tran, for providing an overview on the meeting types and meeting requests, to include granting and denying a meeting. I will continue with the presentation from here. The next step after a meeting has been granted is to submit the meeting package. A meeting package is crucial to achieving a productive discussion or exchange of information. The meeting package provides information relevant to the discussion topics and enables FDA to prepare for the meeting. The draft guidance provides specific information to include in the meeting package. The content will vary depending on the type and subject of the meeting. Meeting packages must be submitted electronically. FDA will be issuing a guidance on how to submit over-the-counter monograph submissions electronically. Prior to publication of that guidance, meeting requests should be submitted to our monograph meeting requests inbox. The timing of the meeting package is important to ensure that FDA has enough time for meeting preparation, review of the meeting package, and for providing preliminary responses to meeting questions posed in the package. This table lists the date by which background packages should be submitted to FDA based on the meeting type granted. You will note that for Type X meetings, the background package should be submitted at the time of the meeting request. Type Y and Z meeting background packages should be submitted no later than 50 or 47 calendar days before the meeting or expected WRO. Preliminary responses are communications from FDA prior to a meeting. They serve as a foundation for discussion between meeting requesters and FDA. They should not be construed as a final response unless there is agreement between the meeting requester and FDA that additional discussion is not necessary for any question, or if a particular question is considered resolved, allowing extra time for discussion of the other questions during the meeting. Preliminary responses communicated by FDA are not intended to generate new information or questions. If a meeting requester provides new or revised data or information, FDA may not be able to provide comments on that new or revised information in the current meeting request. The draft guidance specifies the timelines when FDA will send the meeting requester its preliminary responses. For Type Y and Z meetings, FDA will send the preliminary response no later than 5 calendar days before the meeting date. FDA will generally not send preliminary responses for Type X meetings. For Type Y and Type Z meetings, the meeting requester should notify FDA no later than 3 calendar days following receipt of FDA's preliminary responses regarding whether the meeting is still needed. If the meeting requester believes the meeting is still needed after receipt of FDA's preliminary responses, the meeting requester should send FDA a revised meeting agenda indicating which questions the meeting requester considers resolved and which questions the meeting requester will want to further discuss. Occasionally, circumstances arise that necessitate the need to reschedule a meeting, and if a meeting needs to be rescheduled, it should be done as soon as possible after the original meeting date. It will be at the discretion of the review division whether the meeting should be rescheduled depending on the specific circumstances. A new meeting request should not be submitted. Some general examples of when meetings may be rescheduled are minor delays in submitting meeting package. The meeting package is inadequate or additional information is needed in order to address the questions, and the meeting package contains additional questions or significant changes to questions from those submitted with the meeting request. These are just a few examples, and the draft guidance provides additional examples. In addition to rescheduling meetings, FDA has the discretion to cancel meetings depending on specific circumstances. One example is failure to pay the required fees. If the meeting requester pays the required fee or fees after the meeting has been canceled because of non-payment, FDA will consider a subsequent request to schedule the meeting to be a new request, and the goal timeline for FDA's response will be calculated from the date of the subsequent request. Occasionally, other circumstances arise that necessitate the cancellation of a meeting. Some examples include the meeting package is not received by FDA within the specified timelines. FDA determines the meeting package is inadequate, keeping in mind that meetings are scheduled on the assumption that the meeting requester has submitted appropriate information to support the discussion. Adequate planning by the meeting requester should avoid this problem. The meeting package and questions are substantively different from the original request and no longer meet the criteria for the meeting granted. The meeting requester determines that preliminary responses to its questions are sufficient for its needs and additional discussion is not necessary. In this case, the meeting requester should contact the FDA Regulatory Project Manager to request cancellation of the meeting. FDA will consider whether it agrees that the meeting should be canceled. Some meetings can still be valuable because of the discussion they generate and the opportunity for the division to ask about relevant matters, even if the preliminary responses seem sufficient to answer the meeting requester's questions. If FDA agrees that the meeting can be canceled, the reason for the cancellation will be documented and the preliminary responses will represent the final responses and the official record. Please note the examples here are not an exhaustive list, and again, FDA has the discretion in both rescheduling and canceling meetings. This slide highlights some important meeting conduct considerations for face-to-face, video, and teleconference meetings with FDA. Meetings will be chaired by an FDA staff member and begin with introductions and an overview of the agenda. Attendees should not make audio or visual recordings of discussions at meetings described in this guidance. Presentations by meeting requesters generally are not needed because the information for review and discussion should be part of the meeting package. The meeting requester should summarize the important discussion points, agreements, clarifications, and action items at the end of the meeting or after discussion of each question. This is to ensure that there is mutual understanding of the meeting outcomes and action items. FDA staff can add or further clarify any important points not covered in the summary, and these items can be added to the meeting minutes. FDA's minutes are the official records of meetings. The minutes are not intended to represent a transcript of the meeting. As such, FDA's documentation of meeting outcomes, agreements, disagreements, and action items is critical to ensuring that this information is preserved for meeting attendees and future reference. FDA may communicate additional information in the final minutes that was not explicitly communicated during the meeting or that provides further explanation of discussion topics. FDA's final minutes will distinguish this additional information from the discussion that occurred during the meeting. Generally, FDA intends to issue the official, finalized minutes to the meeting requester within 30 calendar days after the meeting. Meeting minutes will not be taken if FDA transmits a written response only for any meeting type. Now we will cover joint meetings. Multiple meeting requesters may want to join together and have a formal meeting with FDA to discuss studies and other information necessary to support over-the-counter monograph order submissions, matters relevant to the regulation of over-the-counter monograph drugs, or over-the-counter monograph drug development that the multiple meeting requesters have a common interest in. These formal meetings with multiple meeting requesters are known as joint meetings. A joint meeting may be requested for a type X, Y, or Z meeting. To facilitate efficient participation by multiple meeting requesters may consider forming an over-the-counter monograph industry working group to collaborate, otherwise known as OTC IWG. Each member of the over-the-counter industry working group should be a meeting requester eligible for formal meetings with FDA or be an organization nominated by a meeting requester to represent their interests. Members of the over-the-counter industry working group who are subject to fees, including their affiliates, must not have any unpaid user fees to participate in an over-the-counter monograph drug meeting, as that term is defined at Section 744L11 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The over-the-counter industry working group should consider creating agreements among its members on matters such as confidentiality, governance, and any other issues that may come up during the collaboration. FDA does not advise on the business arrangements between members of an over-the-counter industry working group, nor mediate between parties within an over-the-counter industry working group. If an over-the-counter industry working group is formed, designate a single point of contact to communicate with FDA. FDA will not meet individually with any meeting requester who has joined an over-the-counter industry working group to discuss an issue that is the subject of a joint meeting for which the meeting requester attended or is scheduled to participate in, unless the over-the-counter industry working group nominates such meeting requester to meet individually with FDA. All information required for meeting requests by a single meeting requester should also be submitted for a joint meeting. Additionally, specific information that should be provided in the meeting request for a joint meeting include the following: the meeting being requested is a joint meeting, appropriate documentation on the formation of the over-the-counter industry working group and a list of its members, the name of the point of contact as designated by the over-the-counter industry working group, and appropriate documentation designating the point of contact, appropriate documentation from a member or members of the over-the-counter industry working group nominating an organization to represent its interests, if applicable, authorization from each member of the over-the-counter industry working group that FDA may disclose that information to the other meeting requesters participating in the meeting, to the extent that information submitted to FDA for discussion at the meeting could be protected from disclosure under Section 505G of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. All information recommended for meeting packages by a single meeting requester should also be submitted for a joint meeting. Additionally, the meeting package should include any specific discussion topics that should not be discussed because the over-the-counter industry working group has not agreed to share information protected from disclosure. The point of contact is responsible for ensuring that discussion during the joint meeting is consistent with the over-the-counter industry working group agreements on confidentiality. Because of facility and space limitations for face-to-face meetings, the number of individuals able to attend the joint meeting in person may be limited. Next, I'll briefly discuss confidentiality. The over-the-counter monograph order process is generally a public process. Under this order process, Section 505GD of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act limits the information that can be confidentially submitted to FDA in connection with proceedings on an order, including an over-the-counter monograph order request, otherwise known as OMOR. This limitation on confidentiality extends to formal meeting requests and information submitted to FDA in connection with a formal meeting. Such information in the context of formal meetings may include the background package, meeting minutes, and other meeting correspondence. In addition, although certain information in connection with a formal meeting may be publicly disclosed or otherwise publicly available in accordance with Section 505GD of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, a formal meeting is not open to the public to attend, and only the meeting requester, or for joint meetings, the group of meeting requesters and/or their representatives may be present at the meeting with FDA. FDA posted the draft guidance on our website on February 1st, 2022, fulfilling the goal date as set out in the goals document. The FDA is soliciting public input on the draft guidance prior to finalization. The notice of availability was published in the Federal Register on February 7, 2022, and provides instructions for submitting public comments. Although you may submit comments on a guidance at any time, submit your comments by April 8 to ensure FDA considers your comments before beginning work on the final guidance. On this slide, I've provided links to some helpful resources on monograph reform, our monograph database, information on non-prescription drugs, and the draft meeting guidance. For questions on the formal meetings between FDA and sponsors or requesters of over-the-counter monograph drugs draft guidance, please email FDA at druginfo@fda.hhs.gov. If you have questions on monograph reform, you can use the same drug info email address. If you have user fee questions, please email cedercollections@fda.hhs.gov. For meeting requests, use monograph-meeting-requests@fda.hhs.gov. And if you have small business and industry assistance questions, email CDER SBIA@fda.hhs.gov. That concludes our presentation today. Now we will move to the live Q&A portion of the webinar. If you haven't put in your questions, please do so now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both for the great presentations. We'll now transition into our Q&A session, and as another reminder, if you haven't had a chance to enter your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Looks like we have some questions coming in right now, and the first group of questions appears to be addressed to Commander Tran. And here is the first question. How do I have a formal meeting with the FDA?
Thank you for that question. As stated in our presentation, FDA issued this draft guidance to specify the procedures and principles for formal meetings between FDA and sponsors or requester of OTC monograph drugs, and we collectively refer to these sponsors and requesters of OTC monograph drugs requesting meetings as meeting requesters. The draft guidance establishes procedures for meeting requesters to meet with FDA to obtain advice on the studies and other information necessary to support submissions under Section 505G of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, other matters relevant to the regulation of non-prescription drugs, and the development of new OTC monograph drugs. The guidance also establishes procedures to facilitate efficient participation in joint meetings by multiple meeting requesters and/or organizations nominated by them to represent their interests.
Thank you, Commander Tran, for responding to that question. We do have another question for you, and here it is. How do I submit a request for a formal meeting with the FDA?
Meeting requests must be submitted electronically, and FDA will be issuing a separate guidance on how to submit OTC monograph submissions, including meeting requests electronically. And prior to publication of that guidance, please submit your meeting request to monograph-meeting-request@fda.hhs.gov.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Commander Tran, and here's the final question in this round. When can sponsors and requesters begin requesting formal meetings?
Thank you for that question. Sponsors and requesters may submit meeting requests at any time.
Thank you for responding to that question. We're going to move on to Commander Thompson for the next group of questions. And here is the first question for Commander Thompson. When will the FDA begin granting and scheduling meetings?
So thank you for that question. First, I'd like to note that FDA has committed to specific performance goals that include meeting management goals for these formal meetings that occur between FDA and meeting requesters. These goals, agreed to by FDA and industry, are described in the over-the-counter Monograph User Fee Program Performance Goals and Procedures document, which is also commonly referred to as the OMUFA Commitment Letter. FDA has been reviewing and acknowledging meeting requests in the order of receipt. However, please note that applicable timelines and performance goals relating to meetings are not effective until October 1st of this year. In addition, once a meeting request has been reviewed, FDA will send further correspondence to let the meeting requester know if their meeting has been granted, the timing of the meeting, and the type and format of the meeting if appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander Thompson, for responding to that question. We've got another question for you, and here is the question. Do I need to submit a new meeting request if I submitted one prior to the issuance of the draft guidance?
So no, there's no need to resubmit a new meeting request. FDA will respond to meeting requests that were received prior to the issuance of our draft guidance. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Commander Thompson, and here's the question. How does the draft guidance affect pending meeting requests?
Thank you for that question. So for pending meeting requests, FDA will follow up with meeting requesters if there is any further information needed, and then all future meeting requests should follow our draft guidance. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We're going to go back to Commander Tran for the next few questions. And here's the first question for Commander Tran. I submitted a meeting request. Why hasn't the FDA responded or granted the meeting?
So FDA has been reviewing and acknowledging meeting requests in the order of receipt. However, as I mentioned in the presentation, applicable meeting timelines and performance goals agreed to by FDA and industry in the OMUFA commitment letter are not effective until October 1st of this year. And once a meeting request has been reviewed, FDA will send further correspondence to let the meeting requester know if their meeting has been granted, timing of the meeting, and the type and format of the meeting if appropriate. Thank
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Commander Tran, and here is the question. For meeting requests submitted after the issuance of the draft guidance, will FDA provide the response within the specified time frame that was presented in the
Again, the meeting management performance goals, including meeting request response time goals, are not effective until October 1st, 2022. Therefore, meeting requests submitted before this date will not be processed under specified timeframes outlined in the OMUFA commitment letter.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Commander Tran, and this is the question. If I am not a sponsor or requester, can I have a formal meeting with the FDA?
And thank you for that question. As stated in the presentation, a sponsor is defined as any person marketing, manufacturing, or processing a drug that is listed pursuant to the Section 510J of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and is or will be subject to an administrative order under 505G of the Act. A requester is defined as any person or group of persons marketing, manufacturing, processing, or developing a drug. So formal meetings as described in the guidance are only between FDA and sponsors or requesters of OTC monograph drugs. And if you do not meet the definition of sponsor or requester, You can still request to meet with FDA by contacting FDA's Professional Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement staff. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. Just a reminder to our attendees, if you haven't had a chance to enter your questions into that Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows relevant to the presentation. Moving on to Commander Thompson for the next group of questions, and here is the first question. How does the OTC Industry Working Group work?
Thank you. Another good question. So as was noted in the presentation, multiple meeting requesters may consider forming an over-the-counter monograph industry working group, also known as an OTC IWG, in order to collaborate on issues of common interest and to have a joint meeting with the FDA. The OTC IWG may consist of multiple meeting requesters and organizations nominated by meeting requesters to represent their interests, and it helps to facilitate participation. So each member of the OTC IWG will need to be eligible for formal meetings or, as noted before, be an organization nominated by a meeting requester to represent their interests. The OTC IWG must designate a single point of contact to facilitate communications between FDA and the OTC IWG. In addition, I'll note that FDA does not meet individually with any meeting requester who is a member of an OTC IWG to discuss the issue that is subject to a joint meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few more questions that are coming in for Commander Thompson, and here's the next question. What happens if one member of the OTC Industry Working Group has not paid their user fee?
Thank you. Another good question. So, as noted in the presentation, all members of the OTC IWG and their affiliates who are subject to fees must not have any unpaid user fees in order to participate in an over-the-counter monograph meeting. If a member of the OTC IWG has not paid fees, FDA would deny the joint meeting request or would cancel a previously scheduled meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Another question about the industry working group. What if we have questions on how to structure our OTC IWG for a joint meeting?
So FDA does not advise on business arrangements between members of an OTC IWG, nor mediate between parties within a working group. The over-the-counter industry working group should consider creating agreements among its members on matters such as confidentiality, governance, and any other issues that may come up during their collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got one final question that addressed to Commander Thompson, and this is the question. What is the limit for the number of individuals who can attend the joint meeting in person for a face-to-face meeting?
For in-person meetings, each meeting request will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Because of facility and space limitations for face-to-face meetings, the number of individuals able to attend the joint meeting in person may be limited. So when the meeting request is granted, the regulatory project manager will inform the meeting requesters of the total number of individuals who can attend in person. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. We're now going to move back to Commander Tran for some more questions that have come in. And here's the next question. Is WRO considered a formal?
So WRO stands for written response only, and it is one of the formal meeting formats along with the face-to-face and teleconference or video conference meeting formats that may be requested for a type X, Y, or Z meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question for Commander Tran, and here's the question. Can a meeting requester request for FDA to schedule a meeting later than the specified FDA meeting schedule timeframe provided in the draft?
So the answer to this question is yes. If the requested date for any meeting type is later than the specified FDA meeting schedule timeframe, the meeting date should be within 14 calendar days of the requested date.
Thank you for responding to that question. Looks like we've got a group of questions coming in for Commander Thompson right now. So we're going to move back to Commander Thompson for the next few questions. And here's the first question. Is a formal meeting open for the public to attend?
No, so a formal meeting is not open for the public to attend. As noted in the presentation, although certain information in connection with a formal meeting may be disclosed or otherwise made publicly available, which is consistent with Section 505G(d) of the Act, a formal meeting is not open to the public to attend. Only the meeting requester, or if it's a joint meeting, the group of meeting requesters and/or their representatives may be present at a meeting with FDA. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got another question on meetings for Commander Thompson. Are these formal meetings confidential?
The over-the-counter monograph order process is generally a public process, and Section 505G(d) of the Act limits the information that can be confidentially submitted to FDA in connection with proceedings on an order. Therefore, meeting documents such as the request, the background package, and other meeting information will be made public consistent with the Act. Thanks.
Thanks for responding to that question. Looks like we have one more question for Commander Thompson, and here's the question. When does the FDA make information submitted to the FDA in connection to formal meetings public?
Thank you for that question. So again, under Section 505G(d) of the Act, FDA must make any information submitted by a requester in support of an OMOR, which does include meeting requests and meeting packages, made available to the public not later than the date on which the proposed order is issued. Additionally, FDA must make any information submitted by any other person with respect to an order requested or initiated by FDA available to the public upon submission as well. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. We've just had some new questions come in for Commander Tran, and there's the first question for Commander Tran. How will a meeting requester know if their meeting request is granted or denied?
So if a meeting request is granted or denied, FDA will notify the meeting requester in writing according to the timelines provided in our presentation.
Thank you for responding to that question. We did have another question come in for Commander Tran, and here's the question. If a meeting request is denied, does the meeting requester need to resubmit a new meeting request?
Thank you for that question. So if a meeting request is denied, the meeting requester will need to resubmit a new meeting request after addressing all applicable issues.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Commander Tran, and here's the question. What is the time frame for FDA to respond to a WRO?
As noted in our presentation, the WRO response timelines are 30 calendar days from receipt of a Type X meeting request and 70 or 75 calendar days from receipt of the meeting request for the Type Y or Type Z meeting.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. Moving back to Commander Thompson for a few more questions that just came in. And here's the first question. Does sending in a meeting package with the meeting request for a Type Y and Z meeting expedite the timing for a response from FDA?
So if I understand the question correctly, will a background package submitted with the request for either a Type Y or Type Z meeting expedite FDA's response? The answer is no. And just as a reminder, a meeting package is required at the time of submission for a Type X meeting request. However, meeting packages for Type Y and Type Z meetings are due at either 50 or 47 calendar days before the expected written response time or before the date of the meeting.
Thank you for responding to that question. Another question just came in for Commander Thompson, and here's the question. Will FDA deny a meeting request or cancel a previously scheduled meeting if the meeting requester and or its affiliates have any unpaid user fee?
And the answer to that question is yes. FDA will deny a meeting request or cancel a previously scheduled meeting if the meeting requester and or its affiliates who are subject to fees have any unpaid user fees. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Looks like we've got a few more minutes left, so we're going to try to get a couple more questions that just came in for Commander Tran. And here's the first question. You said that a meeting request could be denied for failure to pay your user fees. What are the user fees?
Thank you for that question. However, the discussion about user fees is really outside of the scope of this webinar, and more information about user fees can be found on the OTC Monograph Reform website. In addition, we had an SBIA webinar on user fees in June 2021 that you can refer to on the SBIA's website.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got time just about for one more question for Commander Tran. And here's the question. What happens if a meeting requester submits a meeting request for a Type Y and FDA determines it should be a different type of meeting?
So a meeting requester should really indicate the type and format of the meeting in the meeting request. However, we will access each meeting request, including the WRO request, to determine whether the request should be granted, appropriate meeting type, and appropriate meeting format. Thank you.
Well, that's just about all the time we have, just enough time to give some few closing reminders. And we want to thank our speakers for the very informative and timely talk and also for responding to numerous questions that came in. A few closing reminders.